More Star Trek Adventures 2E goodness is ready for you today as we now dive into the role-playing game and the second edition game Toolkit. I'm Michael Dismuke. I am a lead blogger on Continuing Missions, the #1 site for Star Trek Adventures. And wow, I'm waking up. It's early for me because we have somebody from the UK in now, so my coffee hasn't kicked in yet. I did something on Captain's Log too. I was like the lead writer there, and and Jim Johnson.
Jim Johnson, I'm the project manager and line editor for the Star Trek Adventures RPG, the Captain's Log solo RPG, and project manage the Lower Decks Buffer Time card game, which will be coming out here pretty soon. I'm super excited about that. It's the first time I've had a non-RPG product on my resume, so that's kind of cool. Excited to be a co-host on this here show with Michael these last couple of years, 150 odd episodes, just cruising on toward 200 here. Can't believe that we're keep still doing it, but we keep finding new things to talk about. And it doesn't hurt that we keep having new products coming out. So today's episode, we're going to talk all about the second edition game toolkit. And our special guest is no stranger to you all and a friend to us. And it's Nathan Dowdell. Please introduce yourself and tell us what you're working on right now within the bounds of NDAs.
Yes, I'm Nathan Dowdell. I'm the Modifius lead designer and developer for the 2D20 system RPGs and lead designer for Star Trek Adventures First and Second Edition, amongst other things. And recently, I've been working on a number of Star Trek Adventures books that we can't otherwise discuss yet, but also a few other projects for our various other games, most recently Dreams and Machines.
Well, this begs a good question, Jim. You said something in a comment to me the other day about how successful 2E has been received so far. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Sure. In general terms, honestly, because we're right now we're sending out the pre-orders are shipping out to America, right? UK's already gotten their pre-orders. UK has regular retail stock now, of course, because everything goes to the UK first. The US retail shipment is, I think, very, very close to the port and should be going to the warehouse within the next week or so, at which point it will get distributed out to retail in the process that always does, from boats, trains, buses, like however the stuff gets from one warehouse to another warehouse. It's all out of our hands,
chickens,
for the most part. What's that?
I said mules, chickens,
chickens, like, people with backpacks, lugging stuff over the Appalachians, I guess.
All right. Well,
anyway,
well received. Point
being, the stock is getting out there. Pre-order sales, we're really happy with the pre-order sales. We've gotten a ton of press coverage. Like the brand team at Modifius did a fantastic job getting out influencer copies and review copies, and we've had tons and tons of press and interviews and reviews, and there's even a handful of streamers like doing live, or not so much live necessarily, but I know the Stream Punks and Guy Sklanders and a few other folks have done actual plays. We even did an actual play a couple of weeks ago, which was a lot of fun. So yeah, really well received. Been keeping my finger on the pulse of social media. It seems in general, the vast majority of the STA fans are happy with the changes. The sky is falling phenomenon we saw in February and March didn't really seem to happen. So I'm happy that
you love that you love the people. Where are they? And my question is, okay, this is my one shout before we go into our topic for today. All the people who are hypercritical, where are you now?
Yeah, that always happens, right?
No, where are you now? Okay, we love you. We care about you.
Yeah, it's much ado about nothing, ultimately.
All right, so now let's talk much ado about something, and we talk to us. Answer the question: the game toolkit. Why? What's the game toolkit for?
Well, Nathan, I want your perspective on this too, certainly, but I'll just jump in and say I think even now in the 21st century, with people trying to transition to digital more frequently than print, I think there's still a very strong current of, if you have a new RPG coming out, you got to have a game master toolkit, game master screen, whatever. Even though I don't like to use the screen as an actual barrier between me and my players. I like to lay it flat on the table. But it just seems to be a thing that when you release a new game, you got your core book or whatever your core supplement is, you got a screen / toolkit kind of stuff, and then you've got other supplemental products as well. So I don't want to say that we were forced to do it necessarily. We just wanted to have another accessory, to complement the core book release. And for us, it just worked out nicely that we did have the toolkit and the screen and the reference cards, and the booklet, because we want to add a booklet for very practical reasons in terms of legalities and distribution. If you put a book in a product, then it changes the tax implications for the international world. It's a secret knowledge there. Well, not really a secret, but anyway, so we knew we wanted to put a booklet in here. And then because the core book, because I had to make a lot of cuts to the core book to get it down to a manageable size to keep it from being price prohibitive, a lot of the content that was cut from the core book, I was like, well, I can just dump it right into the toolkit. I can add more space frames, I can add more optional rules, I can add some of the other stuff to it. So it was kind of a safety valve in some respects to because I didn't want to lose all that content. Some of the content got repurposed into other ways. But mostly it's an opportunity to give players and game masters more stuff, more reference tools to help enhance their game. And so between the screen, especially between the screen and the reference cards, I think those are going to be really powerful tools for players and game masters to enhance their gameplay. But I'll stop there. I want Nathan's perspective on why a game toolkit.
So I agree with pretty much everything that Jim's just said there. But from my perspective, while I don't get a great deal of use out of GM screens either, for much the same reasons, I like to have the table accessible to me, especially when I've got threat tokens and things like that to manage. It means I can reach those a lot more easily if I don't have to reach over a great big GM screen. But with the first edition GM toolkit, the summary sheets found significantly more use than the GM screen itself, especially when running convention demos and things like that, because I could lay those out with the character sheets, and even if I don't address them directly, they're still there as something that catches the player's eyes that I can peruse while I'm setting up to start a demo, or when it's not their turn and things like that, and or even just while they're making rolls and things and so forth. They served as a really useful additional option, and they were based on the summary sheets that I'd written up for my initial playtesters when I started doing initial internal playtesting for first edition 8 years ago now. So we've established that those kinds of things are useful. So it was kind of a no-brainer to continue that with second edition, and with the sheer volume of content that just couldn't fit into the core book this time round. It was a natural place to put a lot of that, and to make sure a lot of that didn't go to waste.
Very good. Very good. Toolkit. I get it now. All right. So let's break it down now. What will fans of the game enjoy in this toolkit? You want to lead it off, Jim, chapter by chapter?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the booklet is 40 pages, and I think close to half of that is additional space frames. I think we talked about it in a previous episode when we were talking about the core book. We had a list of 40 space frames that we wanted to put into the core book, and just through the process of layout and development, we had to trim. And so we had written up, 40 space frames for the core book, and I still had most of them on hand, right? So we got 15 into the core book, and we've managed to fit 17 more into here. I packed, just as many as I could, and I was also really conscious of wanting to not just retread everything we had done in Utopia Planitia and in first edition, right? So I wanted to at least offer a few new options in the toolkit, because obviously, I mean, just from a practical point of view, it's a selling point, right? To not say, oh, here's this toolkit with space frames you've already seen, 2 years ago in Utopia Planitia. Here's a couple new ones. Here's a few new ones. So we did manage to fit in a few new ones here, and we also, by putting the Freedom class in here, we kind of gave a little bit of a touchstone to say, look, we do have the ability to use content from the JJ verse, the Kelvin verse movie. So we got a picture in there of the Franklin, and Thomas Maroney had written up a couple of space frames for me for another product, and I repurposed those into here just to give something new and different. We also added in, I think Nathan wrote up the Sagan. I think that's new to the game, and then also I think we did some revisions on the Mogai and the Vorcha just to get those in, just to give a little bit of variety to some of the other species that are out there. So a lot of space frames.
Sorry to interrupt. I'm not even sure I don't think the Mogai actually ever appeared in any previous in any first edition book, because I've looked, because I love that design. It's one of the few good things that came out of Nemesis. I had wanted to write up one for a for my own home campaigns, and I'd been looking around for one, and then finally got hold of the PDF of the game, and goes, oh no, someone has already put one together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I'll be using this instead of. I've been always falling back on the Didera decks every time I need a Romulan ship, but this one's way cooler.
Yeah. I think we snuck a prototype Mogai into the Shackleton book just to give a sense that the Romulans were building new craft and experimenting with craft. I don't remember. I don't.
There's and I think it's not released yet, Jim, but I think there's something you had me work on a mission that I think I got one in there as just the stat block, but no picture.
Possibly. But anyway, so it was an opportunity to add more space frames. One of the one of the decisions I made in the core book when I was trying to figure out what classes to put in the core book versus the toolkit was it just worked out that two of the space frames uses mission pods, right? And so the two ships that use the mission pods and the page that describes the mission pods themselves, that was 3 pages that were easy to cut out of the core book. And I could put all those right into the toolkit very nicely because they're all of a theme. So that worked out pretty well. So we got the Nebula
and the quad nacelle ones, so the Constellation and the Sagan.
Yeah. So fortunately, it worked out that some things it was easy to kind of group them together and move them. I would have loved to have done even more space frames, but I also didn't want to just make this like a Utopia Planitia light kind of thing, because hopefully somewhere down the road we'll do a new Starships book. I don't know when or if we will. No promises, but
I don't know. I would say go watch. We did the conversion of 1E to 2E show a couple weeks back with Aaron and Al Spader, and I don't know, the tweaks are so easy to me. I'm not sure if there's a demand for product, I think there's a lot of things I'd rather see than a new Starship book, because Utopia Planitia, again, the tweaks are not that hard. So yeah,
and there's still stuff that we didn't get to even with first edition that I would really love to tap into. So I love Starships. I feel like we've kind of done Starships though recently, even though it's been 2 years. I'd like to do some other stuff before we get back to another Starships book, but we'll see how it all works out. And it's not entirely up to us, right? Ultimately the leadership at Modiphius will dictate what ultimately gets greenlit or not greenlit. But so anyway, if you're a fan of Starships, a bunch of Starships in this book, some optional rules. We added a couple of mission profiles. I think there's 5 more mission profiles in here, 5 more Starship talents, some optional bits about if you want to use the yellow alert, red alert option for your status, that'll kind of give you a head start going into a combat situation with in terms of your shields.
Speaking of ships, I just want to again remark on the art. As always, I know this is duplicative of some of the other art, but the Mogai spaceship on page 30 coming out of this gaseous nebula is just so one of the best ship picture art I've ever seen.
On 30. Yeah, that was again, just we were intentional about the design of the core book and this overall 2E design to have a full page piece of art on the left and then the table of contents on the right for each chapter, right? And this is just one of the pieces of art that we couldn't fit into the core book. I think there had been a couple more chapters in the core book that ultimately got cut. And
Tobias did this one amazing because it's Tobias Richter. Yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome. And also the piece of art that's earlier in the book with the crew sitting around the conference room. That's a great piece of art by Paolo Pugioni, and wanted that in the core book too, but just couldn't find a place to put it. So we held on to it because obviously we want to use all the art that we paid for.
I know,
right?
I could just stare at it. I mean, there's just so much. Like, I love it when it tells a story. Like, if I'm like, okay, I could again pull this, show it to my players, and just have a field day with just this one image alone.
Yeah, and what I appreciate about this, and this is something that Ariel, our art director, was really keen on, was that he's been with us for 3 or 4 years now. He came in just after Shackleton, and one of the first comments to me, he said he noticed that in all this first edition art, we didn't have a lot of quote unquote slice of life type of artwork where it's just like, the crew doing stuff. It's usually been starships or action or drama or something, which is fine. But there just wasn't a lot of like, what do characters do in the setting, just, when they're chilling or doing their job or just talking or whatever. And so he wanted to be more intentional about getting more slice of life stuff into the book, which I was, totally on board with. And so this is an example of that, where you've got, a conference room, you got people talking around.
Right. The reason, no, I love his psychology behind that too, because like if people are playing the quick start characters like we're playing the pre-gen characters in our game jam, then the slice of life is not so specific, because if it's an action scene somewhere, you're kind of forced to push the story into that context. Whereas if it's a little bit more open, like them exploring a planet, it's a scene setup. So I like throwing in art like that mentally. I like playing with it. So that was a really good idea.
Yeah. And of course, with the core book, I was really intentional about wanting to make sure that the artists were credited on every page. So every time you see a piece of art, there's the artist credit there, mostly to show the artist some love, and also just to say, look, I know that other industry professionals look at our stuff. I mean, just like we look at their stuff. And if they're looking for artists, then they can see the art, they can see the name, they can go out to ArtStation or the internet or whatever and find these people and give them more work, because they're doing fantastic work, and they deserve more work. So hopefully they'll get more opportunities there.
Awesome. So anything more about chapter 1 before we jump over to chapter 2 about game master resources?
Chapter 1 is really all about starships, and if you're into starships, optional rules, more talents, etc. That's your chapter. And then chapter 2, we go into game master resources, and I think I'll let Nathan talk about this more, because most of this is his. Michael, some of this, like the first 2 pages about your continuing missions, some of this is your stuff that had to get cut out of the core book and adapted into here in terms of like the writing and the B plots and that kind of stuff.
I want to just say one of the best parts of Jim is I have in writing these is the quotes I can actually find from TV shows. So the opening quote on this one made me so happy. I think I was watching back when we were putting this together. I was watching Deep Space Nine, and I came across the episode where Jake is pursuing his writing. And so I got this quote from Anaya: "It's what you're going to be writing next that interests me." I'm like, oh my God, that's perfect for a game mastering chapter. All right, Nathan, take it.
I'll second that. Finding just the right quote for a chapter is always a satisfying thing. Not just for Star Trek. I've found a few particularly nice ones that I've put into source books that we're currently working on. So I can't give specific examples there. But had some fun with Dune doing similar, using quotes from Irulan as chapter headings. It felt right to scatter those through a Dune book.
It kind of weaves everything together really tightly. Like, this is in the Star Trek universe. I love it.
But yes, so a good chunk of the GM guidance, the GM resources in here is stuff that I've written for the SRD or for the old GM's guide from first edition, and brought up to date, refined in a couple of places because it's either from experience or to bring it up to date with the new rules, and it's. For the most part, it's ways to make use of the mechanics from the GM's perspective. So there are some like story ideas, such as the sidebar on B plot, story threads, and Chekhov's gun. but a lot of it is how to use extended tasks, how to use opposed tests or opposition and opponents during contests and challenges. One of my favourites sections is start at 33 and onto 34, the risks, costs, and consequences.
That's new, right? That was not in any other publication before, I don't think.
I think it was in the GM guide from first edition. If not, it's been in the SRD for a number of years and is based loosely on some advice I found in a friend's blog for Fate Accelerated games.
I love it. Just so you know, I'm both me and Jim are working on our own personal projects, right? Trying to develop some writing. And I was thinking, you listen to all these things about how to make a great story and what to do to keep the conflict going and the rhythm. And I was like, ooh, this is a good quick cheat sheet there. Things get a little boring. I can pick one of these and, keep the story going. So Game Masters, page 33.
I like it as a basic set of fairly broad examples for just at the very least, what to do with your complications when players roll them, or when NPCs roll them. This covers a lot of ground in in a dozen or so bullet points.
One
page that could be a whole movie.
Yeah, you can do a lot with any of those options, and I think once you've got those in your head, players rolling a natural 20, natural 20s and coming up with those complications, that's not a problem. But there's more to it than just, here's what you do with complications, because of the way that it's framed. It's not just risks, it's not just things that could go wrong. You could also be, it could be, this might be what happens when you fail. If it with consequences or with success at a cost, but it could also be something that you as the GM put as a gate in front of even attempting an action. If you attempt this will happen. This is your price of entry. This is the cost of trying to do this thing. And just between those three possibilities, risks, costs, and consequences, and the dozen or so bullets afterwards, there's a lot that you can get done and a lot of different ways that you can shape the game in very subtle ways.
So here's my thing. There's 9 things listed there. I would mentally create a 10th one that says 2 things happen or roll again. And I would make this a table so that if people are having trouble coming up with complications, just go ahead and roll a 2d20 and then select one of these, or, roll a 20, a 1920 and roll twice. So that's my thing for people. If you're not sure, so you don't waste time reading through it, just use it as a random table.
You and your random tables. I think one of the things I appreciate about this, Nathan, is I wish more games had stuff like this in it, because what I really like digging, not so much digging, but I really like hearing from the developers, like what was their thought process? What are they thinking about when they're designing a game, and how do they run the game compared to how could I run the game if I'm learning their game system? Because I think one of the things I've noticed, especially with second edition coming out, a lot of the fans who are really into the game are looking at the changes we've made, and they're asking why did you make that change? Like not just that you made it, but what was the thought process behind changing, X to Y or whatever. And I think having this kind of material is really helpful, because it just really helps you get into Nathan's brain and like, how's Nathan approaching this? How does Nathan run it? Because he's been doing this for 10 plus years now. You've been on 2D20, right? And you've got so many ways of playing it and running it that I love learn. I always learn something new when I'm reading your stuff like this. And I know a lot of fans online read this stuff and like the light bulb goes off. And they're like, oh, that's how to play with a complication, or that's how to play with threat. It's not just a meta currency I have to throw at the players or whatever. So it's just, I love seeing this kind of deeper dive into mechanics and the thought process. And seriously, other game designers out there, like, do more of this, because like this is getting into the weeds, and I really appreciate getting into the weeds of game design and just like thought process of how to pull it together.
Can you dive in a little bit, Nathan, about more uses for threat, since of course that's one of my favorite subjects, threat? Yes.
Obviously, there's a whole section on that, and again, I think this turned up in the GM's guide before, and it's been in the SRD for a while. So it's material that in a more generic form is available for free, but this has been tailored to Star Trek a little bit more closely. And there are a number of ways that I've come to approach threat for different scenarios and different circumstances. The ability to, as a GM, to use it to highlight specific things or emphasize specific things, using it as a spotlight is always fun, especially as that can be a nice relief from players that expect it to be used as a stick as opposed to as a spotlight. You're using it to point out this thing is important, this thing is serious, rather than just punishing the players for the audacity of trying something. And so that's been a valuable way to approach threat in my own games, and a way that once players start seeing it used that way, they tend to relax a little bit about it, because especially new players do tend to get a little bit anxious about threat and about the notion of it. But the reality of it, what happens when a point is spent, is really quite as bad as what they expect to happen.
Yeah, I think
having these examples serves that well.
Yeah, I like how you kind of say that, because I try to treat it almost like guardrails. We've talked about players going way off, and I use threat maybe to create some guardrails. So it's like, no, you can't go back because of this, or you can't take the ship because of this, and that's where I'm funneling threat into your point.
But obviously, beyond that, there are a few other concepts, and I've discussed this a few times in discussions online, of causality and making sure that there's a feeling within the narrative of your game that the threat that you spend has come from somewhere. It has resulted from something that the players have done or something that the NPCs have done. My frequent example that I use is you're working your way through an enemy base, or you board an enemy ship. An enemy sounds the alarm and adds threat that way, and that threat can then be used to bring in reinforcements because they've sounded the alarm. There's a natural cause and effect to that, and that causality helps keep the threat from feeling quite so out of nowhere and feel more organic in use.
Exactly. Very good. And then what's proportionate resistance? I see that proportionate resistance.
Yes, this is actually an idea that came from a former colleague, someone that worked at Modiphius as part of our RPG team back when First Edition was still in development and during its earlier years, who had been running a TOS era game frequently, and very much lent into that high threat, heightened action, heightened drama style of play. A big part of that was the idea, and from that came the idea that fundamentally the amount of threat that the players give you during the game should be used to inform the kind of game that you give them back. You can treat the threat that they give you as a signal for what they want out of the game. And if they're going to throw a whole load of threat at you, you should throw it back. You should use it you should use it on things in order to make the game more exciting and more thrilling for them.
Exactly.
In part because that's what they tacitly asking for by giving you all that threat, but also in part because if you don't, they're going to treat threat as irrelevant.
Exactly. Yeah, I love that. I totally like, if someone gives me I've had players like every single roll, they're maxing out their die hand with threat. I'm like, okay, you are really taking some risks, and I start bringing the damage on in different ways. Things start blowing up around them. It very quickly becomes a Kelvin universe Star Trek.
The last one of these, before it gets into the next big heading, threat as status gauge, actually came from an adventure that an adventure from Mutant Chronicles 3rd Edition, the first 2D20 system game that was ever published, and we updated a few adventures from older editions of that game to the new rules to put in some of the source books. And one of them had this very tense sort of stealth and social stealth sort of situation, sort of a big society party that was also being used, I think, as either a cult, either cult activity or a black market deal or something like that. And in there, I put this whole little subsystem of, here's what happens if threat reaches certain levels, because it'll affect the way that the guards and the security for this event will respond to things. So that idea of threat as a status gauge kind of stuck with me, and it's a fun little way of playing with threat without ever spending it.
I actually really like that. So is it almost like you're in this situation and you the team has to really play it safe to like succeed, meaning they're bound to spin spin less threat? Is it kind of like that?
It's that to an extent, yes. There's a lot of a sense of don't escalate things, don't cause too much trouble, keep things quiet, because if you let things escalate, it will get tougher for you overall because of how the enemies will respond, how your opponents will respond.
Wait, so can I ask a question just so I understand? I'm a visual learner. I'm sorry to interrupt, but so when you say gauge, threat gauge, then are you telling the players like, hey, if it gets over 10, I'm spending it. If it goes over 8, I'm definitely spending it?
It's not even the decision to spend. It's if threat is 5 or lower, then the situation is calm, and like the security guards in this place are going to be relatively taking it easy. They're keeping watch, but they're not especially engaged, or maybe they're goofing off a bit, or they're or whatever. And then if it's 6 to 10, then no, they've been aware that there's something wrong. They're now on alert. They're tightening up their patrols.
Difficulties +1 on tasks.
I'm not maybe not even affecting difficulty or anything like that. Just my choice of how the NPCs behave. I'm using it as it passes this threshold, and the situation shifts in this way, just on how NPCs behave, on how the situation develops, as much as anything else narration.
Okay, so maybe the guards start standing a little closer to the conversations or following people. Okay.
You start passing 15, and now they know there's something seriously wrong, and they're actively searching for something, for threats and things like that. And you've got that kind of situation, but at the same time, that means that when I do spend threat, that becomes a release of tension, even more so than with normal. Because if I'm just past that 15 threshold, and there's a quick skirmish between one of our disguised away team who's currently investigating this pre-warp culture. And there's a quick skirmish between them and one of the guards, and they've had to knock one of them out with a phaser beam or a Vulcan nerve pinch, and stuff them in the cupboard or something. A bit of threat has been spent during that fight just to keep the tension up, but now, because that threat's been spent, it's dropped below another threshold again, and now things are simmering down a little bit.
They drag the body into the closet, close it, and continue on. Okay, I get it. Okay.
And the overall situation has calmed down a little bit because it's had that release of tension.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to definitely be trying to use that. I could have used that, Jim, during our game on the ship, on the SS Tranquil. That would have been a great way to use.
Yeah, well, actually, I was using it from the opposite direction as a player. I think this is one of my favorite sections that Nathan wrote for the toolkit. I love the idea of threat not just being a resource that you can spend and use, but just the fact that it's there is a tool that game masters and players can use to influence their role playing, right? If you think about like TV episodes or something where things get tense and things are happening, like the music changes and like you can just feel the tension, right? Even though things aren't necessarily happening, like you can just feel things are ratcheting up. You're not spending the threat; it's just the pile is growing, right? And as a role player and frankly a method actor, I can look at that pile of threat and say, okay, I should be approaching this scene with a little bit more tension, a little bit like character may not understand exactly why things are more tense, but like I can feel it, right? In a storytelling gaming kind of perspective. And I was thinking, just listening to you all talk, I was like that moment in the first Mission Impossible movie where Tom Cruise's main, I just drew a blank on his character's name. What's the main character's name?
Ethan Hunt.
Nathan Hunt. Yeah, he's on the wire, right?
Ethan Hunt. Yeah.
He's in the room and he's on the thing. And it's like it's dead silent, but super tense, right? Because like one wrong move and he's completely screwed. But like there's a lot of threat. Like if that was a role playing situation, there's a huge amount of threat sitting there, and he's forcing himself to be very, very deliberate. And so you're approaching that maybe a little differently than you would if there wasn't much threat, right? The scene would be different, right? So when we were playing that game, Michael, I was keeping an eye on the threat gauge, the threat total, just to see where it was, and I used that as an influence to either role play more or less situation. And fortunately I was playing Ensign Tenons, right? So he was pretty brash in anyway. So I think if there had been more threat, I would have changed how I approached the scenes a little bit, because the threat was very low for most of that adventure. I stayed fairly brash throughout most of it. So
yeah, it was low. I was commenting, I was like, this is the least threat I've ever had in a game. And so you all played a little bolder. Okay.
Yeah, but I love the idea of like having the players and the game master look at just the sheer total of threat or lack of total of threat, and using that as an influence to how you approach scenes and play with it that way. I guess I don't want to say it's like an advanced technique, but it's just getting into the weeds a little further of this game and like all the possibilities that are there to play with the drama and the rising tension and the falling tension. All the great stuff that you do in writing, whether it's a screenplay or a novel.
Yeah. In fact, speaking of which, let's talk about on page 38, there's that inset box, no time to rest. This is a good chance for us to, again, clarify how stress works in 2E. So before, when a scene ended in 1E, when a scene ended, characters got all of their stress back. This has been clarified, streamlined a little bit. You want Nathan to talk about now at the end of a scene, usually people can take a break, a rest, and that brings them some stress back, not all of their stress back, like in 1E. So let's talk about what the no time to rest box.
So typically, at the very least, you're likely to be able to take a breather and get a couple of points of stress back at the end of a scene. Even if it's just like stopping and catching your breath for 30 seconds. No time to rest is a mechanic that I've had in a number of 2D20 games for a while, and I've used in a lot of my own campaigns, where I just want to rush things to the next scene and kind of hook one scene to the next. Sorry, my cough's been playing up today. I decided to play up right as we kicked off filming.
I'll put in a sound effect there, some high-pitched feminine cough, like.
And yeah, part of this is to ensure that players continue to feel pressured when the situation is high and is tense, and there's a lot of things are going at quite a fast pace. You're having to spend threats to reflect this, so you are using from some of that, also that built up tension. But there are potential advantages, so you don't lose any momentum that you picked up from last scene because you're carrying on straight into the next one. And anything like traits and things like that you created that would normally vanish at the end of the last scene, they're probably going to stick around for a little while longer, because again, you've created this direct. This scene goes straight into the next one with no time to stop between them.
Love it. I love that. Yeah, good.
Whereas normally the end of a scene is it's either moved location or it's moved forward in time, and there's an opportunity to at least take stock and catch your breath between them.
Yeah, I think I would also use this. Recently, we had a game where someone suffered a lot of mental stress from seeing one of the red shirts perish. And I think I might employ this too, that until they get their psychological counseling, until they get to the counselor, as long as they're not in a restful situation, really like in their room getting some sort of thing, I would probably spin the two thread and say, no, you're going to still be distressed. You're still distressed until such time the mission might be over where you can actually recoup your wits. So that might be a place where I would use it. And again, we've spoken before about still a counselor could step in, do some dice rolls and knock that stress back. But
I would probably handle that more reasonably by counting it as a trait placed on that character, to say that they can't rest, they can't stop and recover. They're haunted.
Well, I did that. So let me ask you. So I did that, but as we go into the next scene, of course, they're going to carry the trait with them.
This is an area where it does go into kind of advanced uses of traits and things like that, where fundamentally a trait doesn't have to just stick to the normal increased or decreased difficulty type effects. You could use it as a little flag to say, apply a different GM ruling here. So it could well be that you've got a character that's got that trait, and until they've got an opportunity to actually get rid of that, say by seeing the counsellor, they're only going to get about half as much stress when they rest.
Okay, got it. And I could
something like that.
Yeah, and I could still employ the no time to rest.
You absolutely could, yeah. The no time to rest is very much more about the situation and the scene as a whole, as opposed to individual characters. But essentially you're using similar principle to, this character can't stop and recover in the way that they normally would.
Right, because to me, a trait, could carry multiple episodes too. Like look at Picard. It carried all the way into season 3 of Picard. I'm traumatized to be aboard. You kind of trait. So I'm
pretty sure that's never going to go away.
Right.
There are some things that just never go away. I mean, and Picard has more than one. I would arguably say that his artificial heart would be another.
Yeah, good one.
Yeah, and that's certainly a consequence from his choices as a younger officer.
Right. Or but see, then his brain can actually no. I got to say, Picard season 1, he probably lost the artificial heart trait because he's a synthetic now, and he lost his brain thing.
His heart is still technically artificial. It's just so's the rest of him now.
Right. That's true. Yeah, you're right. Just scratch off heart. It's just artificial now. Just scratch off heart.
At that point, you're kind of adding an extra species trait and. Yeah, something like that.
And then the brain thing he had going on in Picard season 1 too went away. And of course, we found out we didn't even know he had it before then. So
it was teased in Best of Both Worlds.
Oh, really?
Future Picard in the scenes in the TNG finale was suffering from Irumodic syndrome, and that's why Picard knew it was a risk for him in season 1 of Picard.
Oh, you sadistic geek to know that. Okay, cool.
All this discussion is making me curious, Nathan, where you have not you specifically, but just like you have traits, and some of those traits can be very long term or even permanent traits. In designing 2D20 systems, not just Star Trek, but just in general 2D20, have you? And this is partly because I'm not that familiar with all the other 2D20 systems that are out there, but have you ever played with the idea of being a little bit more granular with traits, where you have like long term traits that a player couldn't just buy off, or make go away, versus ones that would be long term, like an artificial heart is a really kind of a long term change to the character. Have you ever thought about granulating that a little bit, so you've got long term traits that you just can't pay off versus ones that are like more?
Yeah, there is an element of that in a number of games. Both Dishonored and Dune distinguish between long-term and short-term defeats when it comes to overcoming opponents in conflicts, whether those are physical combat or social and social ones and psychological ones and so forth. A long-term physical defeat is likely to be serious injury or death, compared to a short-term one, which is, you're defeated, you're probably a bit roughed up, but you're not dead, you're not going to suffer any major lasting consequences. Whereas in a social situation, a short-term defeat might be that you've been temporarily embarrassed and can't really exert yourself during this social situation for the rest of the scene. But a long-term social defeat might well be dishonor or shame, such that you're cast out of your whole social level of society. In a more practical sense, this is also how we approached scars in Acton Cthulhu. Because obviously Acton Cthulhu, having that Call of Cthulhu legacy behind it, We wanted some mechanic that could echo the classic sanity points system from Call of Cthulhu, but we didn't want to take quite that same approach to it. So in Action Cthulhu, where you can take physical injuries and mental injuries from the various enemies and horrors that you'll encounter, there's a chance when you're healing that one of those injuries may end up becoming a permanent long-term aspect of the character that has a serious consequences for the character's well-being going forwards. So yeah, if you think of and that partially covers sanity, mental injuries becoming mental scars, but it can also cover physical ones such as debilitating injuries, which are entirely appropriate given the World War II setting of Action Cthulhu. Those kinds of mechanics wouldn't be that difficult to port over to Star Trek Adventures for something that maybe focuses a bit more on the Federation Klingon War in the 2250s or the Dominion War in the 2370s. Where characters on screen come away with lasting physical and emotional damage that doesn't go away quickly.
Got it. And speaking of damage, environmental hazards. And then let's see the last page of the 2E toolkit here. Nathan, what do we have?
So environmental hazards is very much a brief stop, but it's worth detailing because very often you'll find characters thrown into dangerous situations, and it's useful to have a little bit of a guidance on how to manage that. This is very, very bare bones, though, and often something that's likely to get fleshed out in subsequent books for specific environments come into play, or in campaigns and adventures where there are very specific environments in use. But broadly, it's just a case of take damage at these intervals, at this rate, or with this severity, and that's what you've got to face in the background while you're doing other things.
Yeah,
the follow-on from that, to be honest, I find is more interesting because it's something that comes up a lot in Star Trek, especially in many of the older shows, where you're dealing with an opponent that you just can't punch or phaser your way out. No amount of phaser fire will ever stop Q. In fact, he's probably not going to look too kindly upon you if you try that. And even more corporeal adversaries, if you're down in mine tunnels and face to face with an angry Mother Horta,
right?
No amount of phaser fire is going to stop it.
Yeah, I like
these situations. These are situations that you have to talk your way out of. You have to find the creative solution out of.
Yeah, some other scientific way.
These were in first edition, and I think it's important to keep them around because these kinds of foes and these kind of dilemmas, and these I say foes, many of them are dealt with through negotiation and trying to come to a compromise or a better solution with them,
or running.
These kinds of or running, or asking very nicely.
Exactly.
But these kinds of adversaries are very much a foundational part of Star Trek. There are problems that you cannot solve with brute force. There are problems that you cannot solve the conventional way. You've got to be clever. You've got to work your way around the problem.
I think about the episode with Apollo. The TOS with Apollo. They had to figure out from the ship that the power base is the temple.
The number of alien space gods that Kirk encountered during his 5-year mission.
Right. I think he cleared them all out of the way for everybody else. That's basically what he did.
Yeah. So that by the time a century later, there's only really the Q left.
Exactly. Jackson Lansing and Colin Kelly recently brought them all the gods back in their comic book in the latest Star Treks, which was, I don't know if you had a chance to read it, but I was like, yes, this is like, it felt so much like Marvel Comics when you have like the Watcher, the Eternal, like you have all the gods lined up, it felt very much like that.
Yeah, I was thinking about this when I was watching the second season of Prodigy, and how the characters were trying to fight the Loom. Right, you got this incredibly powerful time traveling kind of thing going on. Like, gosh, these kids, how are they going to even manage to fight this? And it's just like, I would love to have an opportunity in a future book to expand on this, rather than just half a page that we have here in the toolkit. But just as a starting point, this is great, and it really, I think, highlights how different Star Trek Adventures can be from other games, where you can present your players with impossible situations, right? You don't just have a bag of hit points to go knock down, right? You got a problem that you cannot possibly solve through standard conventional means. You have to think your way around it or find some other solution other than just bashing away at it or checking out points or something. I love that, and you're absolutely right. It's so present in so much Star Trek. It's almost a trope of the franchise.
It's one of our tropes. I wrote it into Lower Decks book as a common trope, is facing those cosmic imps, or someone becomes a god, Yeah, those are common. Very good. So really, this is a really, really helpful toolkit. Any final words before we close out with gratitude?
Well, I mean, we just talked about the booklet itself, right? The screen and the cards and the poster. Now, the poster is kind of the posters are nice to have. One side is the map that's in the front of the core book, and then the back is the cover art of the core book. It's just nice to have. I don't know if I'll frame the art side of it. I think I'll frame it and put the map on the wall somewhere if I can find room. Although someone was joking, I think Stephanie, Stephanie Toro, one of our graphic designers, she joked that I should get one of those, those wall decals that you can make and have stuck on your wall to make a decal of the map and put it on my ceiling in my office. So that's right there. And because I don't have a lot of wall space, it's all bookshelves. So the poster is nice to have. I think we were able. It wasn't that expensive to fit it into the toolkit, so we did that. The 8 reference cards are just worth highlighting, I think, because the reference cards were really well received in first edition, the ones that we put into the game toolkit and also the starter set. And I wanted to do more reference cards, of course, because there's a lot of stuff in the book that is just nicely laid out in tables. You got your list of actions, major and minor actions, your threat spends, your momentum spends, the breaches, right? The breaches are more optional in second edition than they were in first edition, but they're really cool. And I found a way to format it so that we could put it on one reference card. So if you do, if your ship does suffer a breach, you can roll on some of those random tables and like add a little bit more detail to it. And hey, bonus, you can even take that card and use it in captain's log, because if you want to give more options for how your ship is suffering damage, that just gives you a wealth of ideas. I am reasonably confident that no game company has ever made a Game Master screen or a reference toolkit that is going to meet every player's needs, because players always make their own reference cards and toolkits and reference sheets and all that stuff. So I tried to be pretty comprehensive on these reference cards. I suspect I probably missed some key detail that some fans are going to say, oh, I wish it had this, or I wish it had that. Which is fine, it'll be what it is. But 8 reference cards, double-sided, just a ton of information, and hopefully, like Nathan was saying earlier, you put those on the table with your group while you're running the game. Hopefully they'll at least pick it up and look at it and maybe get some ideas, or see a rule that maybe they glossed over in the rule book or something, assuming they even cracked open the rule book, right? We know some players don't look at the rule book, they just look at the character sheet, but hopefully a useful tool. And then of course the screen itself, 4-panel portrait screen, beautiful art on one side, and then just a ton of tables on the inside for hopefully useful for the game master, along with page references to the core book, of course, because we were developing it at the same time as the core book. We were able to put page references, cross references in there as well. Was there anything else to say? Oh, I guess the only other thing I'll say about the toolkit and the game screen and stuff is just the way things the way things worked out. We released the quick start earlier in the year while we were still laying out the core book and the toolkit, right? So everything had already been finished manuscript wise. We were doing the layout of the core rulebook and the toolkit pretty much concurrently. And the quick start came out, and fortunately there was a window of time where we were getting feedback from fans on the quick start in certain places where there was where they needed a little more clarity on rules, or there were a couple of little errors that we made or whatever. And so there was an opportunity. We were able to make changes to the core book and to the toolkit while we were making, so it worked out really well, where the feedback we were getting from the quick start, we were able to implement into the toolkit and into the core book. I mean, for us, it was a lot of logistical back and forth, trying to fix things before we went into layout, and trying not to frustrate our graphic designers with making more changes. But we were like, no, these are really good changes because it's going to make things better. It's going to make a better end product, right? So just process of discovery, it worked out pretty well, I think. I'm sure there's stuff that we missed, and like I said, once these get out into retail, I'm sure fans will see the toolkit, the screen and the cards, and will wish that there was other stuff on them. But
they'll end up putting on continuing. They'll end up putting something on continuing missions. I'm always amazed with what some people whip together for their table game. It would be impossible to satisfy everyone, anyways.
Very true.
Yeah, very true. We Nathan, have a creative bunch.
Any last thoughts on the cards or on the screen itself?
Not particularly, mainly because I've not actually seen them yet.
Okay. I thought you did. Okay, we'll get you.
Jim consistently rubs this in. By the way, just so you know, Nathan, Jim rubs it in all day long. He occasionally holds up what he has.
You sent me the PDF of the booklet, which I've been referencing both for work purposes and for the campaign that I'm planning. Mm-hmm. But I've not actually seen the summary sheets of the screen yet, because I've not got because I'm working off PDFs at the moment. So
okay, well, I can fix that easily enough. I'll fix that on Monday.
Yeah, you only write and design the game. No need for you to actually have the final product. That would just be obscene.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to gratitude then. My gratitude is actually going to be to Jim. And the reason I'm saying this, as of the day that we're recording this, a talented person I know named Jolie Lee went ahead and redesigned my website, michaeldismuke.com. And I never thought I would have a day where I have a actual website with enough publications that's not completely boring to look at. And it just came up, Jim, as I was kind of assembling my LinkedIn, where I kind of keep a record of I keep everything electronic. I wanted to keep a record of everything I've ever had a finger on. And I was like, you know what? LinkedIn just buries it way down below. I said, well, let me just go ahead and do this. I've had the name for a while, the website. I've had the URL for a while. And she's a talented designer, so she threw this together for me. And then as I was finished looking at it, I was like, oh my goodness, if I had never done continuing missions and Jim Johnson had not reached out, this would not be a possibility. So sorry, Jim. I know I hate you hate being embarrassed and put on the spot, but I'm going to embarrass and put you on the spot. And my gratitude goes to you this week.
Thank you,
Nathan.
I'm not really that sure. It's been quite a few weeks since the last time I was on, and not much more has happened in my life beyond just bearing down and getting on with work. I will extend my gratitude to the rest of the Modiphius development team, my close colleagues who now provide me with far more support and assistance on the work I do day to day than I had all those years ago when we were working on first edition. And all the hard work they do, not just on the RPGs, but on board games and miniatures games, and arranging play testing and interacting with the community for gathering errata and Q&As, and just making sure that there's a schedule so that there's a degree of order to the chaos of game design.
Very nice. Jim, take us out.
Yeah, I want to thank Nathan and the development team and the playtesters for all the work that they did to bring this together, and especially this deeper dive that Nathan provided for everything that's in this toolkit, like the more uses for threat, the causality, the opposition, like all these extra bits in here that for me as a game master and a player, I really like getting that deeper dive because it gives me it makes me feel more connected to the game system, and the more I read, because I think the game master guide was really the eye opener for me. It was like, oh, there's so much more here that I can dig down into, and then this is just a reminder that there's just so much more to the game. And the more I read it, the more it sinks in, so that when I start running this game for my players, it becomes second nature. I'm not quite there yet, but I'm getting there. And maybe another couple of more years after I run more of it, it'll be more second nature. But I just really appreciate all the hard work that you put into this. And I tried to get as much of it in here as I could. So hopefully I didn't disappoint you too much by fitting it in where we could. Also want to thank all the fans. Of course, if you hadn't been supporting this game for the last 7-8 years, we wouldn't have done a second edition. Frankly, we would have probably wrapped it up long ago. But fortunately, the fans have stuck with us and they enjoy it. And the response to second edition has been really good. So very gratified to hear that. And thanks for being with us. And look forward to more cool stuff to come. And finally, Michael, thank you for for being part of this podcast for 2 years. I had no idea we would have gone 2 years plus.
I know.
But I just can't imagine it. And
it's an aptly named podcast.
Yeah, and I had no idea we'd do a second edition when we started it. Right, it wasn't even a thought process. Onward and upward for Star Trek Adventures and for continuing conversations. And Nathan, I know you got a ton of stuff on your plate right now that have nothing to do with Star Trek. So, best wishes for all that too. I'm looking forward to seeing what happens next for 2D20 and all the other cool stuff that we're working on. So,
yeah,
thanks everybody.
Yeah, for sure. And a couple more, just so you know, we're in year 3 of podcasts right now. We're about to go into year 4. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Crazy, huh? All right. The conversation continues. IDIC.
Live long and prosper. Be safe, be well. We'll talk to you all next time.